Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking about something that's pretty cutting edge, I guess you could say, but also surprisingly relevant, I think, to anyone who uses the internet these days. We're going to be looking at this legal battle that's brewing over how artificial intelligence actually learns.
Yeah.
Think of it this way. If you're going to bake a cake, you need ingredients.
Right.
But for AI, the ingredients are just massive amounts of data.
Yeah.
And that's where things start to get kind of sticky.
Yeah. And what's fascinating here is this data often includes things like books and articles, code, stuff that's protected by copyright. And that's the heart of the issue, right? We're trying to figure out if it's really okay for companies to use all this copyrighted material to train their AI, to essentially teach it how to think and create.
And the company at the center of this legal storm is OpenAI. They're the folks behind ChatGPT.
Right.
And they're facing lawsuits from authors, publishers, even big news organizations like the New York Times. Essentially, the accusation is that OpenAI used all this copyrighted material without permission to create their incredibly powerful AI models.
Exactly. And it gets even more complicated because some of the content that ChatGPT generates can be eerily similar to existing works.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, for example, imagine typing in a prompt like, write a scene in the style of George R.R. Martin, and the AI spits out something that sounds almost identical to a passage from Game of Thrones.
That's where the lawsuits are getting some serious traction, right?
Right.
Because if an AI can mimic a famous author so convincingly, what does that mean for the author's livelihood?
Right.
What about this idea of fair use? Isn't that OpenAI's main defense?
Right. OpenAI is arguing that their use of copyrighted material falls under fair use because the AI is essentially transforming that material into something new. But the legal definition of transformative is pretty blurry.
Okay.
And the courts are really now trying to decide if using these copyrighted works to train AI really qualifies.
So it makes you wonder if there are specific examples where AI output would be considered transformative and other places where it's just clearly not.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole debate so tricky, right?
Yeah.
Let's say an AI uses a cookbook to learn about different recipes. Is the AI simply copying those recipes? Or is it using that knowledge to create something truly new, like a completely original dish? I mean, it's such a nuanced question.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers.
And it seems like OpenAI really doubled down on their fair use argument, even going so far as to say it's practically impossible to create advanced AI without using copyrighted material.
That's right, yeah. They're basically arguing that restricting access to copyrighted works would just stifle innovation and put the U.S. at a disadvantage compared to countries with, looser regulations.
But some experts are now pushing back on that claim, suggesting that it might be possible to train these models without relying so heavily on copyrighted material.
Right.
Which, if true, would seriously undermine OpenAI's argument.
It would raise some questions about whether their use of copyrighted material was truly necessary or if they simply took the easiest route, even if it meant kind of pushing the boundaries of copyright law.
And that brings us to another layer of this whole saga. The accusation that OpenAI actually stripped copyright information from some of the data that they used for training.
Yeah.
If that's proven true, wouldn't that suggest they were deliberately trying to hide the origins of their data?
It would certainly raise some red flags. Imagine if you borrowed a bunch of tools from your neighbor without asking and then, scratched off the label so they couldn't tell where they came from. That's kind of what OpenAI is accused of doing with this copyrighted material.
Not a good look.
Yeah.
It's almost as if they knew that what they were doing was, questionable at best.
Right.
Okay, so we've got lawsuits, we've got accusations, and a whole lot of legal jargon.
Right.
But let's try to put like a human face on this. Imagine you're a comedian like Sarah Silverman. She's actually one of the people suing OpenAI. And you've spent years honing your craft. And suddenly there's an AI generating jokes that sound suspiciously like yours.
It raises fundamental questions about ownership, creativity, and the value of originality.
Yeah.
If AI can mimic human creativity so effectively, how do we protect the rights of those who created the original work?
So it's not just a legal issue, it's an ethical one.
Right.
And I imagine it's causing a lot of anxiety for artists and creators of all kinds.
Yeah.
So what are some potential solutions that could address both the legal and the ethical concerns here?
Well, one approach that OpenAI is exploring is striking these licensing agreements with publishers.
Okay.
So, for example, they partnered with Time magazine to gain access to their archives for training data. Essentially, it's like saying, hey, we'll pay you for the right to use your content.
It's kind of like paying for those ingredients we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that get incredibly expensive considering the sheer volume of data these AI models need?
Exactly. And that's why licensing agreements might not be a perfect solution. There's just so much data out there. It would be almost impossible to get permission for everything. Plus, not everyone wants to sell their work to be used in this way, even if they're offered money.
Yeah. It's like the debate over using someone's image for an advertisement.
Right.
Some people might be fine with it for the right price, while others wouldn't do it for any amount of money.
Exactly.
So if licensing agreements aren't the answer, what else is on the table?
Well, OpenAI is also looking into the possibility of using synthetic data.
Okay.
Which is basically artificially generated content created specifically for training these AI models.
So the quest for the artificial muse.
Yeah.
So instead of using real books and articles, they'd feed the AI computer-generated text and code.
Precisely. It's like building a whole new world of data from scratch.
Wow.
Designed specifically to train AI without any copyright baggage.
That sounds incredibly ambitious.
Yeah.
But is it even possible to create synthetic data that's as rich and nuanced as the real thing? I mean, human language and creativity are pretty complex.
That's the million-dollar question, right? Creating this high-quality synthetic data is a huge technical challenge.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that it will be as effective as training on real-world data.
Okay, so we've got licensing agreements, and we've got synthetic data as potential solutions, but both come with their own set of challenges. What are some of the broader implications of this whole copyright conundrum?
Well, for one thing, the outcomes of these lawsuits could set major precedents for how copyright law applies to AI. Not just for OpenAI, but for the entire tech industry.
So these aren't just isolated cases. They could actually reshape the legal landscape for AI development.
Exactly. And it's not just about legal battles and corporate profits. It's about figuring out how to balance the rights of creators with the potential of AI to transform society.
And speaking of transformation, you mentioned earlier that OpenAI argued that restrictive copyright laws could put the U.S. at a disadvantage globally.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that a bit more?
Yeah, so their argument is that countries like China, with less stringent regulations, could gain a competitive edge in AI development if the U.S. clamps down too hard on access to data. It's a complex, economic and geopolitical issue that's intertwined with the legal and ethical debates we've been discussing.
It's a lot to unpack. All right, well, we'll pause here for now, and we'll pick up the conversation in part 2, where we'll explore some of the potential outcomes of these lawsuits and what they could mean for the future of AI and copyright. Stay tuned.
So before the break, we were talking about what might happen if the courts don't buy OpenAI's argument that using all this copyrighted material is essential for AI development.
Yeah. It's a fascinating question because it kind of forces us to consider what other options might be available.
Right.
We've already talked a bit about licensing agreements and synthetic data, but are there other, intriguing possibilities out there?
Well, yeah, there are some researchers are exploring techniques that could allow AI to learn from this publicly available data without directly copying it.
Okay, so instead of feeding the AI entire books and articles, they'd be using methods that allow the AI to extract knowledge and patterns from the data without actually storing or reproducing the original content.
Exactly. It's a bit like the difference between taking a photograph of a painting and just describing the painting to someone, right? You're conveying the information about the artwork without actually making a copy of it.
That's a great analogy. It makes it much easier to understand. But even if these alternative techniques prove effective, wouldn't they likely be much more complex and expensive to develop than simply using the readily available data?
That's a valid point. It's always easier to take the shortcut, especially when you're a company racing to develop, this cutting-edge technology.
Yeah.
But as we've seen, those shortcuts can lead to ethical and legal minefields. And ultimately, it might be more sustainable in the long run to invest in solutions that respect creators' rights from the outset.
It really sounds like we're approaching a crossroads. On the one hand, we have this potential for AI to revolutionize countless industries. I mean, just so many different aspects of our lives. But on the other hand, we need to figure out how to ensure that this progress doesn't come at the expense of those who create the very content that fuels AI's development.
Precisely, yeah. It's a balancing act. It requires this careful consideration of all these potential consequences, right?
Right.
And it's not just about legal battles and corporate profits, right?
Yeah.
It's about the future of creativity, the value of human ingenuity, and the role of AI in shaping our world.
And speaking of shaping our world, how do you see this debate playing out on a global scale? I mean, we've already talked a little bit about the argument that stricter copyright laws in the U.S. could hinder innovation and give countries like China a competitive edge.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. Different countries are approaching AI copyright in different ways, and it's still too early to say which approach will ultimately prevail. Some countries are opting for more permissive regulations. Others are taking a more cautious stance, emphasizing the protection of creators' rights.
It sounds like we're witnessing a global race to define the rules of the road for AI. And the decisions made today will have far-reaching implications for the future of innovation, creativity, and economic power.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that this isn't just a battle between tech companies and creators. It's a societal challenge that requires all of us to engage in these thoughtful discussions about how to balance competing interests and ensure that AI is developed and used responsibly, ethically.
So what can our listeners do to stay informed and participate in this conversation?
I encourage everyone to follow these legal cases closely and pay attention to any new legislation or regulatory frameworks that emerge. Stay informed about how different countries are approaching AI copyright. And most importantly, engage in conversations about the ethical implications of AI and how we can ensure that it benefits society as a whole, without undermining the rights of creators.
Great advice. Okay. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. This idea that the courts could set major precedents with their rulings on these OpenAI lawsuits. Can you elaborate on what some of those potential precedents might be and how they could impact the future of AI development?
Sure. One possible outcome is that the courts could affirm OpenAI's fair use argument, essentially giving tech companies a green light to continue using copyrighted material for AI training without obtaining explicit permission, without paying royalties. This would likely accelerate AI development, but it also raises concerns about widespread copyright infringement, and the devaluation of creative works.
That would be a major victory for the tech industry, but potentially a huge blow to creators. The concept of intellectual property. What other scenarios are possible?
Another possibility is that the courts could rule against OpenAI, finding that their use of copyrighted material constitutes infringement.
Okay.
This would be a significant setback for the company, could force them to drastically change their approach to AI training, potentially slowing down progress in the field. It could also lead to a wave of similar lawsuits against other tech companies that have used copyrighted data to train their AI models.
So that scenario would be a win for creators' rights, but could potentially stifle innovation in the AI industry.
Exactly. And it's important to remember these are just two possible outcomes. The courts could also issue more nuanced rulings, perhaps establishing specific criteria for when using copyrighted material for AI training is permissible and when it constitutes infringement. For example, they might rule that using small snippets of text is acceptable, but training on entire books, data sets requires explicit permission or licensing agreements.
It sounds like we're in for a period of uncertainty and legal wrangling as the courts grapple with these complex issues.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned earlier, the decisions made in these cases will have ripple effects far beyond the tech industry, potentially impacting everything from education and entertainment to healthcare and scientific research.
Absolutely. The stakes are incredibly high, and it's crucial that we approach these challenges with a sense of urgency and responsibility. We need to find a path forward that balances the need for innovation with the protection of creators' rights and ensures that AI benefits all of humanity, not just a select few.
That's a powerful message to leave our listeners with as we head into the final part of this deep dive. We'll explore some of the broader societal and ethical implications of AI and copyright and discuss what steps we can take to ensure that this technology is used for good. All right, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into, this fascinating and, dare I say, kind of mind-bending world of AI and copyright. We've covered so much ground, from the legal battles around OpenAI's use of all this copyrighted material to, potential solutions like licensing agreements and synthetic data. But now I kind of want to zoom out a bit and think about the bigger picture. What does all this mean for the future of, creativity, the value of human ingenuity, and the role of AI in, shaping our world?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting from a philosophical, societal perspective,
Right.
We're essentially grappling with fundamental questions about the nature of authorship, originality, and what it even means to create something new in a world where AI can seemingly like mimic human creativity with astonishing accuracy, you know?
It's almost like we're entering this new era of the Renaissance where, I don't know, like the tools of creation are evolving at this crazy, unprecedented pace. But instead of paintbrushes and chisels, we're talking about algorithms and data sets.
Precisely. And just as the printing press, disrupted the world of scribes and illuminated manuscripts, AI has the potential to reshape entire industries.
Wow.
And redefine how we create, consume, and value art, music, literature, even scientific discoveries.
And as with, I guess, any major technological shift, there will be winners and losers, disruptions and opportunities. So I imagine, like, some people are feeling incredibly excited about the possibilities of AI.
Yeah.
But, others are feeling anxious, even threatened.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a natural human response to change, especially when that change, challenges our long-held beliefs,
Right.
Power structures. Just think about the early days of photography. Some artists, they saw it as a threat to their livelihoods, while others embraced it as this new form of artistic expression. And ultimately, photography didn't replace painting.
Right.
It simply expanded the possibilities of what art could be.
That's such a good point. It reminds me of how, some musicians initially resisted the use of synthesizers.
Yeah.
They feared that they would, replace traditional instruments.
Right.
But instead, synthesizers became integral to, countless genres of music, creating entirely new soundscapes and possibilities.
Exactly. And I think we can draw a similar parallel with AI.
Yeah.
Instead of viewing it as a replacement for human creativity, we can explore how it might, augment, amplify our abilities, allow us to push the boundaries of what's possible in ways we can't even imagine yet.
It's really exciting to think about the potential for collaboration between humans and AI. Imagine an architect working with an AI to design a building that's both aesthetically stunning, but also incredibly energy efficient.
Right.
Or a musician, using AI to generate new melodies or harmonies that they would never have thought of on their own.
The possibilities are endless, right? But of course, we need to proceed with caution.
Yeah.
With an awareness of the potential pitfalls.
Right.
One concern that's often raised is the potential for AI to exacerbate existing biases and inequalities. If AI models are trained on data that reflects societal prejudices, they could perpetuate and even amplify those biases in their outputs.
That's a really crucial point, and it highlights the importance of making sure that the data used to train these AI models is diverse and representative and free of harmful biases.
Right.
And it underscores the need for, human oversight, critical thinking in the development and deployment of all these AI systems.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't simply assume that AI will automatically solve all of our problems or that it'll always be used for good.
Exactly. We need to be mindful of the potential consequences of relying too heavily on AI, right?
Yeah.
And ensure that we maintain human agency and control over these powerful technologies. And that kind of brings us back to the issue of copyright. Right. If we want AI to be a force for good, we need to figure out how to fairly compensate the creators whose work is being used to train these models.
Right. You can't just expect artists and writers and musicians and all these other creators to freely contribute their work to the AI revolution without receiving any recognition or compensation. I mean, that would be like asking chefs to give away their recipes for free so that AI could learn to cook.
Exactly. And it's not just about, financial compensation.
Yes.
It's about acknowledging the value of human creativity and ensuring that creators have a voice in how their work is used in the development of all this.
So, what steps can we take to move towards a more equitable and sustainable future for AI and copyright? What can our listeners do to be part of this conversation and, contribute to positive change?
First and foremost, stay informed, follow the legal cases, engage with the ethical debates, and support organizations that are advocating for creators' rights in the age of AI.
And beyond staying informed, what kind of actions can individuals take to make a difference?
Support creators directly, buy their books. Listen to their music, attend their performances, choose to consume content from sources that value and compensate their creators, and advocate for policies that protect intellectual property rights while fostering responsible AI development.
Those are great really practical steps that anyone can take. And I think ultimately it comes down to, recognizing that AI isn't some abstract force separate from human society.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a tool that we're creating, that we're shaping.
Right.
And it's up to us to ensure that it reflects, our values and aspirations.
Well said. I mean, AI has this potential to be an incredible force for good, but it's really up to us to guide its development and ensure that it serves humanity, not the other way around.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder these weighty matters. This has been, a deep dive into the complex and ever-evolving world of AI and copyright. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.